So to create our mark making exercise today, we're going to be working in our sketchbook, and if you would, turn your paper horizontally where it is wider than it is tall, and then you'll need a pencil and a ruler. So we're going to begin coming down just a few inches from the top of the page and creating a 9-inch horizontal line. And I'm going to try to center that across the width of the page. I'm going to make a tick mark at the 9-inch and a tick mark at the 0-inch, and then connect the length of that. Now, once you have your 9-inch horizontal line, you are going to make a little tiny vertical tick mark at each 1-inch increment. Now, once you have your tick marks at each 1-inch increment, we're going to turn the ruler vertically, and at the end of the line, we're going to create a 1-inch vertical line. So make sure that this is straight up and down, truly vertical, and it's not leaning in any direction. And then I'm going to repeat that on the right side of the line. And once I have those two lengths measured, I can then connect the bottom of this, creating a rectangle. And it should be perfectly 9 inches if all of your lines are square and perpendicular to one another. Now that I have that complete, I'm going to go along the bottom line and create a tick mark at each 1-inch mark. Now I'm going to take each top and bottom tick mark and line those up with my ruler and connect those together. Now at the top of your page, if you would, write your name and your class code in the top right-hand corner. And underneath each square, you're going to number those 1 through 9. And then at the top of your boxes, you're going to title this Mark Making in Pen. Now you're ready to pick up either your Arteza pen or your Ultra Fine Point Sharpie. Either one of those pens are fine to use for this assignment. Now inside each one of these 9 little squares, we're going to be creating a miniature value scale that explores a lot of different types of mark making techniques for pen work. The first one we're going to create is what's called a hatching value scale. And hatching uses lines going all in the same direction. These can be very short lines built up, or they could be longer lines, but they must all go in the same direction. And I'm going to create my value scale where it starts in one corner as lighter, and then as I move to the opposite corner, my value and my shading is going to get darker. And to do this, you simply add and build up more lines. So here you can see that whole square looks about the same value, and now I'll add in another layer of horizontal lines on top of that, starting to darken as I go. And I'm going to gradually layer in more and more lines until I create a gradual fade in value, where it starts off from light and fades its way into a dark. And that's going to create my first miniature box. Now for the second box, I'm going to create shading called cross hatching. And that's similar to hatching, where I'm going to start off with one layer where everything goes in the same directions using straight lines. But once I've got that first layer blocked in, you can see all of those straight lines that are matching going in the same direction. I'm going to start building up another layer with lines going in a different direction. So they are literally crossing over that first layer. And cross-hatching is great because it can help create a smoother look and blend things a little bit more than just hatching alone. So as I build up these layers, I'm going to continue to turn my pen and my marks in a different direction and continue to layer them, building from light in the top left corner and gradually adding more layers of pen work to a darker value in the bottom right corner. So with this, be patient, just keep adding and keep layering, going in lots of different directions. There's no real true one way to do cross-hatching, so this is a great point for you to sort of experiment and see what kind of mark making you like for cross-hatching. So the next technique we're going to practice is something called stippling. And stippling is using a series of dots to gradually build up value. Now I will say that stippling does take the longest of any of the shading techniques because you have to be really patient because the mark is so small. And it takes a really long time to build up to a really dark value. Another thing I do want to point out is whenever you are stippling, be careful that you aren't hitting your pen against your paper too hard because it is possible to damage the really fine point of the pen, and then you'll end up with a pen that might leak or might be damaged and doesn't mark as well in the future. So just take your time with this part and just gradually add those stippling dots. I will say stippling is really beautiful when you're working on shading small areas, but this is not a shading technique that I would recommend for large areas on your pen drawing in the future. The next style of line we're going to try making a value scale with is with curved lines. And for this, I'm going to make really soft, short, curved, delicate lines to build up for my value scale. Now, I like to work where I'm sort of making a circular motion with my hand and only marking on the sort of downward stroke of that circle and just gradually building up those lines. Now, this is a great technique to use if you're trying to shade and draw animal fur or someone's hair, or things like grasses and trees, things from nature, because this is a very organic way of shading. So this is a great technique to practice, and it sort of builds muscle memory as you are creating your value scale. The next kind of line we're going to experiment with is working with long vertical lines that taper at the end. So extending and then sort of lifting your pen up and off the page so it creates a fading tapered point rather than being a blunt edge point at the end of each line. So I'm going to gradually practice that skill of drawing and lifting my pen at the end to create a nice series or row of those vertical lines. And go back through and I'm layering in just more and more of those to build and create that value scale. kind of line that we're going to experiment with is horizontal broken lines. And this is where you sort of lift your pen up and almost make a series of dashes and dots across your page. So these lines are broken. They aren't continuous in one single line, but they might create a series of different lengths of dots and dashes. And I'm going to gradually build those up all across the page to help me create that value scale. So the more lines that I lay in, the darker the value becomes, and the fewer, the lighter the value is. So I'm going to gradually build up that last value scale. Now for the final 3 boxes, this is where you get to experiment with any shading techniques that you would like. You get to invent your own. So you do not have to do the exact same thing that I've done in my last 3 boxes, but if you would like to, you are more than welcome to. So for my last 3 boxes, what I'm going to create is one with circles that create my value scale, larger circles for lighter values, and smaller circles for darker values. And then my next one is going to be made up of just random squiggles going on all sorts of different directions. And the last one is a series of 3 hatching lines and then changing directions. But remember, the last 3 boxes, you get to design and create your own mark making techniques.